Hello and greetings and salutations. Hope you're having a good day, along with Vince D'Addario. I'm Sean Stiers. Hope you had a good weekend.
Yeah.
We're officially. I was about to say the stretch drive. It's not really the stretch drive, but we're kind of coming down the home stretch. 23 days to go.
Yeah.
Until Notre Dame training camp begins.
If you're talking training camp, I mean, it starts this month, right? So I mean,
Yes.
we are
23 days. 3 weeks from Wednesday is when it starts.
We're getting darn close to the home stretch of the summer, so to speak. When then we actually have actual football to talk about. You know what I mean? So it's fantastic. I think we're gonna tick off a lot of people today, which I'm really looking forward to, because you can never have a show about quarterbacks without ticking off some people.
I was going back and forth. At the very least, there's one thing we can agree on.
Yeah.
Quarterbacks are a hot topic. Regardless of which direction you want to go with that, we can at least agree on that because everyone's going to have their own takes. Everyone's got their own guy.
Yeah.
And all that kind of good stuff. I did just see. We're not going to get into this deeply on today's show. I will just mention it because it did just happen. Ivan Taylor has decommitted from Notre Dame, and he has flipped his commitment to Ann Arbor. So
see that. Okay.
Yes. I know Brian. I'm sure you and Brian will talk about it quite a bit on tomorrow's show. Ryan Roberts, I see him just jumping in the chat. I'm sure he and I, we'll kind of bring this up on tomorrow's show as well, since he'll be here with me to talk some recruiting and stuff like that. So it's out there, but again, we're not gonna get into that. You and I aren't the recruiting guys.
No, and never will be. No. And Brian might talk about it tomorrow, but I definitely will not be talking about it because I don't have a whole lot to say, to be perfectly honest with you. So, I mean,
you gonna pull your AJ Hawk on the Pat McAfee show and just kind of sit there and
just
nod at the camera.
I mean, I know that he was like the number one defensive recruit in the class. I get it. I also, he's a legacy. Obviously, going to Michigan is about the last place that you would want him to go if he was flipping. I mean, nothing good about it, but this is also not exactly out of left field either. So people were anticipating this happening.
I don't want to go too far down a rabbit hole, but like Karen is asking why this decommit is news. Well, he's a top 50 commit. He's been committed for a while, and he's decommitting. So it's always news when a guy commits and then decommits, right?
Right. So. It's a big deal. It's not a surprise, right? So it's not necessarily like breaking news per se. I mean, it's breaking that he actually did it now.
It had been coming.
Correct.
Couldn't quite hold on to it.
Yeah. So. Yeah. And I've been looking for it. I haven't seen it, so I don't have a whole lot of comments about it. But
hey, they got Jadon Blair on Friday. That's big news.
That's huge news.
Back to that same position. The secondary is doing very well in this current cycle. So
there's replacements.
Yeah. Let's just get off the recruiting stuff. Let's get off the recruiting stuff because again, we're not going to go deep into it. Sean, it's not news until Karen says it is. Okay.
It's fair.
Quarterbacks. By the way, hit the like button if you would as you're filing into the show today. We do appreciate it as always. Quarterback's always a hot topic, Vince.
Yeah, it is.
They've kind of popped up on some recent shows, and so I was kind of sitting there over the weekend, and I'm like, you know what? Good a time as any, just to jump into the quarterback stuff, right?
Bring it. Why not? Let's do it.
Let's start with Steve Angeli. I want to hit.
I like the take we're going to take on it. Like, I like the way we are going to talk about quarterbacks today. I like it because we are carving out time to talk about all four of the quarterbacks. Well, I shouldn't say all. Yes, all four, because we are talking about.
We'll hit all four at different points. Riley Leonard, we're kind of.
Right.
We're saving Riley Leonard a little bit more for rapid fire, but we've got things that we're going to talk about with him as well.
Yes, but like all three of the guys competing for the number 2 spot we are going to talk about each guy. And
Yes.
I like that. We're not just going to be like, well, who's your number 2? We're actually going to have a discussion, which I dig that. And I'm interested to see what everybody thinks. I am.
Because everyone's got their opinions, right? Like everyone's kind of got their pet guy. But I thought we would start with this because going into the spring, there was a very high level of Steve Angeli love, right?
Oh, sure.
Like there was still, should they have gotten Riley Leonard?
Yeah.
Should they have just stuck with Angeli? Angeli's a leader. He can be the guy. He loves Notre Dame, all this different stuff. Feels like things fell off dramatically, though, after the last couple of weeks of spring, between the closed jersey scrimmage and the blue gold game. So if you're going scale of 1 to 10, where do you think the love for Angeli was going into the spring versus where do you put it right now? Where would you rate the pre-spring Steve Angeli love? Where do you put the current Steve Angeli love? And I'm talking about overall big picture fan base type stuff.
There was a very large contingent of Notre Dame fans that were very anti getting Riley Leonard and were very pro. Why are we going and getting somebody if we've got Steve Angeli right here on our roster? Okay. And frankly, it's funny. Sloppy Joe hit it perfectly. That was
Is that where you were going to put it?
What I was going to say. And so why muddy it with more words? Pre was an 8 out of 10. Current, it's a 5. And I'm there. I am absolutely there because I think a lot of people thought, well, there's no reason he can't be the starter. And that's an 8 out of 10. Like there's a lot of people that thought that. And that was their thinking going in based on how he played in the bowl game and, just the hype surrounding the number 2 guy. Right. But then they saw everybody play. Well, I guess except for Riley Leonard, technically. But they saw all 3 of these guys play in the blue gold game. And there was a little bit of a shift.
Things changed.
A little bit. They're still the diehards. And that's why it's still 5, right? There's still plenty of people out there that are still very pro Steve Angeli. But I think if you gave them truth serum and you say, who would you rather have, Riley Leonard or Steve Angeli? I still think most of them are going to be pro Riley Leonard in that specific, in a vacuum, either or situation. You can't deny one or the, one under the other, one over the other, however you want to say it.
Yeah, this Ray, kind of needling a little. Where were they saying that at, Sean? I mean, he gave an LOL, but I mean, let's be honest. There was a lot of that in this show, right?
Oh,
That's like, it's not like I'm just making things up and I'm just, looking at Twitter or whatever else, because how much you want to apply, how much stock you want to put on what you see on Twitter. I think that's a very dangerous slope there because
and Sloppy Joe makes another good point. He says we're just so used to starting quote unquote go-getter QBs, that people were plenty happy with Steve. Well, he loves Notre Dame. Well,
right.
So do I.
Drew Pine.
I'm not right. Yeah. I'm not going to start at quarterback for Notre Dame. Like your love for Notre Dame cannot trump athletic talent, I guess is the best way to put it. I love that he loves Notre Dame. That's great.
I mean, look, I know that there's almost some sacrilege about, saying this about Jerry Faust, it seems like, but the same can be applied. Like your love for Notre Dame can only go so far. At the end of the day, Faust was still a high school coach who convinced an athletic director that his love for Notre Dame, could trump, like the lack of experience that he had in, say, recruiting, college players and coaching college players. And look, at the end of the day, your record is what you say you are, right?
Right.
Bill Parcells and Charlie Weiss, and that's what you found out with Jerry Faust. He loved Notre Dame, and he still loves Notre Dame, but he was not able to get it done.
That doesn't mask other issues. Your love for Notre Dame is awesome. It's fantastic. As a Notre Dame fan, I want my best players to love Notre Dame. I want them to be here because they want to be here, right? Which a lot of top universities can't necessarily say that. They're there because they cashed a check or something along those lines, right? And I want everybody that comes to Notre Dame, this is what Vince wants. I want everybody that comes to Notre Dame to come here because they love Notre Dame. They love Marcus Freeman. They want to win a championship here. Of course, that's what you want, right? But that can't overshadow deficiencies.
Can't be the deciding factor.
No, gosh,
you have to be able to cut it on the field. I mean, the walk-ons love Notre Dame, but you're not going to go out and start a team full of walk-ons.
I would say the walk-ons love Notre Dame more than the scholarship players at times.
In many cases,
they're paying their own way.
That's why they're here walking on, because they love Notre Dame that much. It was their dream to be at Notre Dame. They walk on, want to help the team. All that, the whole Rudy thing.
Yeah, for sure.
That's I think the pre-spring, like if I'm giving my numbers, you gave yours. So you agreed with Sloppy Joe. You said 8 pre-spring, 5 current. I agree with the pre-spring. I think my current is more like a 3. Like there are still some diehard Angeli writers out there, but we're not hearing from them nearly as much. Like even like look at right now. We're not seeing the chat filled with, but here's what you're missing with Steve Angeli, which we got a ton of.
We did
during the spring, really right up until those last 2 weekends of spring. We heard a lot more of that at that point than we have heard since then, especially since the interceptions in the Jersey scrimmage. Solid, but not spectacular in the blue gold game. And that combined with what we saw from CJ Carr, I think completely flipped things.
I agree completely. And there were still, and there's still a lot of people that don't necessarily think Riley Leonard's the answer. And that's fine, because you're not going to change any of their opinions until they see him on the field not being injured. I mean, that's the best way I can put it. You're not going to change anybody else's opinion at that point. But I still think, again, if you talk to anybody and you say, look, who would you rather have, a healthy Riley Leonard or a healthy Steve Angeli running your football team in 24? And I think the vast majority of people, would be like, I want a healthy Riley Leonard. Like the only thing that's keeping people from being on the Riley Leonard train is that, well, he's injury prone, and all these different injuries.
And they didn't get to see him.
Correct.
Those last 2 weekends, like we got to see everybody else. There's still, because of that, the injury thing going along with it, that's what really holds them back. I think that most people want to be in on Riley Leonard. And again, I'm saying most, I'm not saying everybody, but I think most want to be in on Riley Leonard. But because of the injury, there's an overriding and fair amount of concern about that.
Sure.
But the fact that they, just didn't get to see him like we got to see all the other 3 in the blue gold game. We didn't get to see Riley Leonard. We saw Riley Leonard with a headset on in the blue gold game. That's what we got to do.
And now, he hasn't been able to do anything. So
we're gonna get to the Kenny Minchie stuff here in just a minute. But I wanted to,
we're gonna talk about everybody. So
I wanted to take the temperature a little bit more on Steve Angeli.
No, I think it's a good question, though. I think it's a really good question, because I think prior to being able to see CJ Carr in a Notre Dame uniform, okay, whether that's practice clips, whether that's the blue gold game, whatever the case may be, okay, because people can watch high school film, and I don't mean this disparagingly, but the vast majority of Notre Dame fans don't know what they're watching when they're watching high school film. They don't know,
right?
What was the genesis of that play? What's the competition like? All of the different things that have to go into when you break down a high school film.
And that's a huge factor. The level of competition these guys are playing against,
100%.
Like especially when they play at these smaller Christian schools and stuff like that. They're just not, in many cases, they're not playing
correct.
An elite level of competition, and that can skew things sometimes.
Absolutely. And so I don't really have a problem with people not necessarily believing who CJ Carr was or whatever, but then they got to see basically side by side Riley. CJ Carr, Angeli and Minchie, and your eyes don't lie to you. You know what I mean? Most of the time. And so I think that's what kind of brought down the Angeli hype a little bit, was they saw it.
And that's a thing, especially like the CJ Carr sample that we got out of the blue gold game is actually the most fair sample that we got because he played for both teams.
That's true.
So Minchie played for one team and Jelly played for one team. Now they were both mixed teams, but CJ Carr played against both teams at different points in the game. So like you got the broadest sample size and amount of sample that you could get out of CJ Carr in that game. And he played. He didn't play quite as well as he did the week before in the Jersey scrimmage, but he's still, of the three, he played the best of the three. Both weeks combined, he definitely played both weeks, or the best of the three.
Yeah.
Sloppy. I wanted to go back to Sloppy Joe. I like this comment. I love women, but that doesn't mean I should be the next bachelor. I mean, Sloppy Joe, I think maybe your love for Gwar disqualifies you from being on The Bachelor, Mr. Fantastic. Death Metal guy. Yeah, that's right.
Fantastic.
So, real quick.
Yeah.
Steve Angeli. Mm-hmm. Let's go greatest strength, biggest weakness, ceiling, and floor for Steve Angeli. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be quick, but I kind of wanted to at least hit those four things on Steve Angeli.
His strength. Yeah, his greatest strength is his leadership. Okay.
I think that's a big one. I think the intangible is definitely the biggest thing.
Absolutely. And he checks all the boxes on the intangible side of things. In my opinion, I think he's a good leader. I think he's a good teammate. I think he does love the university. I think he's here for all the right reasons. I think, those are by far his greatest strengths. You know what I mean? I do. And look,
and relative to the other two, his experience, what
absolutely.
Experience that he has is all, as far as the on field, that is the best. That's the most tangible, I think, strength that Steve Angeli has. Just the experience he was able
absolutely. To experience is huge. This is his third year in the program. I mean, you can't. There's no substitute for experience. There's not, and so those are his strengths. All the intangibles. Those are his strengths. Check, 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 check. You know what I mean? So
right.
I think he checks all of those boxes.
At some point, he has to check more boxes on the tangible side if he's to be a realistic competitor for whatever job at Notre Dame going forward. Biggest weakness.
I mean, this is kind of a broad spectrum, but it's his physical attributes. The arm strength would be one. I think actually a weakness is I think Steve thinks he's better than he actually is, which can get him in trouble.
Right.
Okay. And that's a weakness.
Now, sometimes that can be good, like if you do have a lot of innate confidence.
But it helps if you can back it up. Like you have to be able to physically back it up. Like Brett Favre had an immense amount of confidence in what he was able to do, but he also had the rocket launcher on his right shoulder that he could fit the ball into some pretty tight spots, right? And so I think Steve has Brett Favre mentality with, not the physical gifts that Brett Favre had. And maybe that's a terrible analogy or whatever, but he just doesn't have the arm strength that any of the other three guys on the roster have.
Yeah.
Okay. And I would say another weakness would be his processing. I don't think he processes.
That was the exact word that I was saving.
Yes. I'll let you take it then.
With processing.
I'll let you take, since I talked about the physical side, you can talk about the processing side.
And I mean, again, like just look at both the blue gold game and the Jersey scrimmage. He got locked in on his primary receiver too early and too often, and just was not able to see the field in a much more macro sense, and as a result was either going to throw to the primary option or when he did kind of speed his way at times, I think through his secondary reads, it would just end up being a check down. And we've talked about this before, similar to Ian Book. There's not a willingness, there's either not a willingness or an ability to trust himself to test the ball downfield, to throw to a wide receiver 15, 20 plus yards downfield when he's not completely open, to throw the ball to a spot to let the receiver make a play on it. That's what That's a big thing I think that Steve Angeli lacks right now.
Yeah, and that's massive, because we're going to talk about some other guys, and that is a massive strength for some of these younger guys. And that's where kind of the scale kind of starts to tip a little bit for me.
Right.
Is the processing side of things, to be perfectly honest with you. Because look, Steve Angeli has the physical tools to win college football games. He absolutely does, especially with a roster like Notre Dame has. There's no doubt about it. And so this will kind of transition us into the ceiling and the floor kind of a situation. Steve Angeli's ceiling at Notre Dame, in my personal opinion, is as a backup quarterback. Like, that's his ceiling. If he had to play the entire season, all right, then I think this is a 10-win football team. That's the ceiling. No more than that. Like, 10 wins is the ceiling. 8 is probably the floor. Okay. So could Steve Angeli lead this team to the playoff? Sure. If a 10-2 Notre Dame team could sneak in the back door, with some help from some other people, cool. Like, he could definitely do that. I don't think his ceiling is that of a winning playoff games and advancing this team beyond that.
Right. I think that at best he can get you to the playoff, and the fact that you have a 12-team playoff now, obviously there's an easier path to get there. You're exactly right. Like 10-2, 8-4, and 10-2, maybe with a chance to be 11-1. It's just going to be dicier against the more, the better the competition gets, the dicier it's going to get to be able to win a game with Angeli, as opposed to what they have with a guy like Riley Leonard. So, yeah, I think that's completely it. Like, he's got a chance to get you to the playoff, but you're more likely going to be, in a bowl game, and you're probably not going to be beating elite competition.
Right. I mean, he's
because you can't just throw to your prime, you can't just lock it on your primary guy when you're going against Florida State. Correct. Or Georgia or Alabama, whoever it happens to be, Texas, go on down the list.
You've got to take chances.
Yeah.
You got to take chances.
You've got to be able to make plays all over the field. And that's not what Steve Angeli is able to do right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oops. I clicked something and all of a sudden my whole computer screen cleared. Fortunately, it came back pretty quick.
That's
all
great.
Right. Thanks for the super chat, Lou Holtz, Thunder and Bolts. With all due respect to Angeli, does he really have more experience? Yes, more years in the program, but one start, and now the program has a new offensive coordinator. All fair, but I mean, I realize the bar is very low, but yes, he does have, he does have more experience. Does he have head and shoulders experience? No, but he at least has game experience, and he has shown that he can go out and win a game for you. He won a bowl game against Oregon State at the end of the season.
Well, and he's going into his third year in college football, like practicing amongst other college football players, with if you you can't have it both ways. You're either excited about Notre Dame's roster, and this is the roster that Steve Angeli goes up against every day, or Steve Angeli doesn't have any experience whatsoever. Like, you know what I mean? Like, practice reps do count. And he has experience as a college football player. No, he only has one start under his belt. I totally agree with that. That's one more start than CJ Carr has.
Well, and that's what I was going to say. In comparison to the other two, he has a ton more experience, honestly, right?
He does. I mean, he has more experience.
He's actually played in games, like they let him play and throw passes the entire second half against Tennessee State.
Correct.
Now, granted, was the level of competition great? No, but that was actual real game experience where they let him run the actual offense rather than just handoff for 90% of the time for a half.
Absolutely. So I understand where Lou is going here. I totally get it. He doesn't have much more on the field specific starting experience than the other two guys. Totally agree with that. But he does have experience in college, in a college program, experience with Marcus Freeman, experience with the guys that he's playing with. That's still experience, which he has more of than the other two guys.
Yeah. Steel City coach, and I want to roll this into the Kenny Minchie conversation now, because that's where I wanted to go, because that's kind of, where I think the comparison now goes is Angeli and Minchie. And we did have someone, when we were talking quarterbacks last week, we were talking, it was more about the competition between CJ Carr and Steve Angeli. I think it was when the number 2, who's going to be the number 2 quarterback came up, something along.
Yeah. Somebody asked the question in the mailbag, I believe.
Right. And so on the YouTube, someone commented basically saying that, we're being biased by leaving Minchie out of the conversation and, all this difference. Look, we're not being biased. We're just being realistic with where they stand right now. But, like Steel City Coach is saying respectfully, if Angeli is quote unquote elite, then why did they go after Leonard? And again, I wanted to take it into the Minchie conversation now, because after the spring, most of the conversation was revolving around Steve Angeli and CJ Carr, just like we were talking about last week. Angeli was essentially the number 2 quarterback with, number 1 by default, obviously with Riley Leonard not playing, but the pecking order went Riley Leonard, Steve Angeli, number 2, Kenny Minchie, still number 3, and CJ Carr, number 4. But, we're talking about, okay, can CJ Carr, based on the way he played, pass up Angeli pass up Minchie and even pass up Angeli. So let's pretend CJ Carr's not at Notre Dame right now, or maybe even just CJ Carr was not at Notre Dame during the spring. He was not an early enrollee. He's coming in as a freshman, just like everyone else this summer. So, so we hadn't got to see him play against, college.
Right. He didn't early enrollee in December.
Right.
Like no one else has ever done at Notre Dame.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So if it was just Angeli and Minchie vying to back up Riley Leonard, is there a case for Minchie based on what we got to see from him this spring?
It's 100% a case. Absolutely. I think there's a case. And I think Minchie would be getting a lot more love if there was no CJ Carr. That Minchie would be getting a lot more love because look, he is a dynamic football player. Kenny Minchie is a dynamic football player at the quarterback position. He is. He's got a strong arm. He's got kind of that varied release. Sometimes he's up here. Sometimes he's over here. Sometimes he's in the middle. Like he, kind of that Patrick Mahomes-y kind of release situation, based on what's going on in front of him, which is a dynamic thing to do. I think he's accurate. I think, he can move. I mean, his strength isn't necessarily getting out of the pocket and running, but he is mobile. He can make plays with his legs if he needs to, that kind of a thing. And he's got a strong arm. I mean, his arm is absolutely strong. There's no two ways about it. And so if there was no CJ Carr, if he was a regular enrollee and we hadn't seen him with our own 2 eyes, because look, when he came to Notre Dame, I knew all the hype that was surrounding him, but I still need to see the kid play in person. As soon as I saw CJ Carr even playing catch prior to practice, it was like, that kid's different. Like you could just tell.
Yeah.
You could just tell.
And when you look at the arms, there's a big difference in the arm.
My gosh.
You're talking about the Kenny Minchie arm talent. We're talking about specific.
That's exactly right.
Minchie compared to Angeli.
And remember, I know you remember this because we were sitting right next to each other. CJ Carr, Kenny Minchie were on one side, and Steve Angeli and Gino Guidugli were on the other side, and they were playing catch back and forth. Ball came out way different over here than it did over here. Right. It was just way different. And it was like, okay, there's something different there. And so if we're erasing CJ Carr from the equation, that just leaves Kenny Minchie over here playing catch. And it's like, that kid spins it differently than 18. 8 spins it differently than 18. It just is what it is. And so just because of an arm talent standpoint, there would absolutely be a conversation there. Now, I think it would be closer. I think the competition would be closer, but I think there would absolutely be a competition for the number 2 spot.
It would be closer. And in part, I mean, one, Minchie would have had more reps in the spring. So that would have helped him as well. But he did benefit, as I think Freeman and Guidugli have talked about, by the fact that after Tyler Buckner left last year, that gave both Angeli and Kenny Minchie many more snaps during training camp last year and even during the season last year than they would have had if Tyler Buckner had stayed around. But to me, the biggest, like, I feel like there's not a ton of difference just in the, like we talked about Angeli getting locked in, on the first read. I don't think Minchie necessarily does that, but again, when it gets to the processing of what he's seeing,
sure,
To me, he just looks like a guy who is a calendar year behind Angeli in terms of
fair.
time in college going, like you can see some things starting to click for him, but it's not clicking consistently all the time. And obviously the two things that he has that Angeli doesn't, that you touched on, one is the arm and two is the ability to run, because like he ran for almost 50 yards and a touchdown in the blue gold game. And like you look at him, he completed 63% of his passes in the blue gold game. Angeli completed 68. So they were fairly similar. Angeli threw for a couple of touchdowns. Minchie threw for one, but he ran for another as well. And that's, more, not that he's going to a carbon copy of Riley Leonard by any means, but obviously there's more of a similarity there in this guy can really help himself out, get himself out of some trouble that Steve Angeli can't, because of the fact that he's so athletic and he has the legs that he has underneath him.
Well, and I will say in a comparison situation between Angeli and Minchie was kind of up and down from the practice squad to the varsity, because like he would go down and he would play Caleb Williams, for example. He would do some different things down with the show team, and then he would come up and be the third string on the varsity. So he hasn't even had a full season with the varsity. I mean, he's been up and down. He's just getting out of his freshman year. And so I do think that he is behind from a processing standpoint, from Steve Angeli. And I think that there is a gap there. It's just, you can't ignore the arm talent. You know what I mean? And that's why there's a conversation here. I think at the end of the day, unless there was a big jump between spring and the fall, I think Angeli would probably win that job over Minchie, but it would be very, very close. It would be very close for me. It would.
See, like Jeremiah is saying, he thinks Minchie should be number 2 behind Riley Leonard. He thinks that he's a lot more ready than CJ Carr.
Jeremiah, right, I love you, man, but
see that like the first part I think is a conversation. The second part is not. And that's why, like, anyone who is saying, well, you left Kenny Minchie out of that conversation when you were debating between Carr and Angeli last week, it's like CJ Carr is just that good. Like all these things that we're talking about with processing and getting locked in on reads, Steve Angeli and Kenny Minchie, combined had 3 years in college, whereas CJ Carr hadn't even completed a full semester in college yet. And he was clearly ahead of both of those guys when it came to that stuff. Just his ability to see the field, process quickly, go through all the reads and not lock in on a primary target. Like there was just a big difference. And again, like maybe you saw, especially in the second half of the blue gold game, you saw maybe CJ Carr not quite as sharp, but like we have the body of work to fall back on from the Jersey scrimmage to, to combine that everybody else didn't get to see that. Remember, there was maybe 20 or 30 of us who actually got to see that. When you combine those two things, he's clearly ahead of both of those guys in that department, which I think you can can you make an argument that that's the most important thing?
I mean, and he's got
there's a huge checklist of what you have to have, to be a quarterback, but the ability to make the reads, read a defense, go through your progressions, I think that's pretty huge.
Here's what I think. I think Kenny Minchie is on a normal trajectory for a quarterback. It's completely normal. Very rarely would we at Notre Dame be expecting a true sophomore to be taking over a quarterback. You know what I mean? Like there's a maturation process. There's a a hill you got to climb. You know what I mean? And I think he's kind of right on target. He's right on par with where he should be. It's just unfortunate that the guy that came in behind him is so much more advanced. Look, CJ Carr's a unicorn, people. Like I don't think that's what people understand. I'm not ready to anoint him as the next Trevor Lawrence or anything like that. I'm not there yet. Okay. But what I am saying is from a processing standpoint, I have never seen a kid that's still supposed to be a senior in high school play as well as he did in what we were able to see him do. I've never seen it at the quarterback position personally. And so he's a bit of a unicorn. Minchie is more of the norm, And remember, Minchie wasn't even Notre Dame's top quarterback target. He was kind of an afterthought. He was committed to Pitt and all these other things. He committed super late. And so, he didn't even have an opportunity to kind of dip his toe into what Notre Dame was and all of these different things. And so, this isn't a knock on Kenny Minchie by any stretch of the imagination. I think his progression is right on track. It's just the train behind him is just coming at 100 miles an hour.
And that's the problem because we were trying to, the way we laid it out. Okay, Angeli versus Minchie. If CJ Carr wasn't around, what would that look like? Is there a case for Kenny Minchie? Absolutely, there's a case for Kenny Minchie, and that would be one of the top storylines going into fall training camp if CJ Carr wasn't here. Who's going to win the battle to be the number 2 quarterback, Steve Angeli or Kenny Minchie, if there's no CJ Carr? But that
would be a legitimate conversation.
Right. It would be a legitimate conversation. And as you said, and I completely agree with, there's a case for that. So let's just jump in. So CJ Carr is here. And that is essentially the issue for both Angeli and Kenny Minchie. How long can you hold off CJ Carr? And look, we're not saying he's perfect because Jeremiah followed it up. He said he had multiple dropped interceptions. I don't remember multiple. I do remember one.
Yeah,
I remember the one where he could have been intercepted in the blue gold game that was dropped. Fair. But remember the week before at the Jersey scrimmage, Steve Angeli actually had 2, balls.
Mm-hmm.
Was it 2?
Wasn't one taken back for a touchdown?
Yes. You had the pick 6, So there were actual interceptions, again. So you have to go based on what we were able to see. Do you see a path, though, for Minchie to pass Angeli and hold off CJ Carr, even by the end of next spring, even if we're not talking about fall training camp, like within the next year? Can you realistically see Kenny Minchie seizing hold of the job and pulling ahead of both Angeli and CJ Carr, assuming all 3 of them, and most likely Deuce Knight, are all around next spring?
If the trajectory is what I think it is for all 3 of these guys, the answer is no. I don't see Kenny Minchie rising to the top compared to the other 2. I do have a hard time seeing that. I think that Kenny Minchie could be a great backup to CJ Carr next year in 25, right? I do think that that's an absolute possibility, right? I'm still very curious to see what the coaches do with Steve Angeli as far as his experience and all of these different, the intangibles that we talked about. How much does this staff value that? You know what I mean?
The experience, is that what you're talking about?
The experience piece, the intangibles, right? Over the physical. I'm curious to see how much that is valued when putting together the depth chart.
I think when it's close, the experience is going to win out. And right now, at least what we saw in the spring, it was close. But it's amazing for a guy, it's almost cliche to say it, but for a guy who skipped his senior prom and wasn't going to prom and could have been getting ready for prom and all that different kind of stuff in his final year in high school, he joins the team in December, like you said, during bowl prep, which has never happened at Notre Dame before, and then goes through the spring. Like right now, it's at least close. Like you can still have an honest debate. Like you can believe that CJ Carr is the guy. You can look like Jeremiah. You can pick him apart and say, well, because of this, I don't think he's the guy. And, there's, especially in a 3-man race, everyone's kind of got their pet project, and you can pick and choose whatever you want to back up your argument. And when it's as close as it is, and it is still close right now, then I think experience is sort of the deciding factor. But the question is going to be, how quickly now is CJ Carr going to pull ahead of these guys? Because at the at worst, it's an even heat right now between the 3. Right?
That's fair. Yeah.
Like, again, like you can say, well, I think CJ Carr's ahead of him. And someone else can say, well, I still think Angeli is, but again, when everything else is equal, I think the experience wins out. But once it becomes obvious that one of these guys is clearly outplaying the other two, then I think, again,
you gotta do it.
Like how much experience does Steve Angeli actually have? Like was asked at the start. Then I think that I think you've got to pull the trigger on the guy who's clearly outperforming the other guys.
Yeah, I'm interested to see how everything obviously shakes out and what happens. And I want to say, by the way, Sean, I don't think Steve Angeli can graduate in December. I think it's going to be because isn't that when Drew Pine took off and he had to come back for a semester?
Right.
So
after a year at Arizona State.
Good point. No, good point. So I
guess a semester anyway at Arizona.
Well,
State,
yeah,
but still,
I still don't think he can graduate after 2.5 years. Like that's
I mean,
I know they're on an accelerated track, but I don't think they're that
would
accelerated.
Yeah.
But anyway, regardless of all of that, I don't know who's going to transfer, who's going to stick around. I mean, I don't know these guys personally. I just know from a football standpoint what I think the pecking order should be. And I've been very, very impressed with what CJ Carr has been able to do in the limited amount of time that he's been in Notre Dame. You also can't deny the arm strength of Kenny Minchie and what he's been able to do since he's been here. And, it's just unfortunate for Steve Angeli that he's in the position that he's in. I'll just say it that way. He's a good quarterback. He can get you a bunch of wins. He can go to another school potentially and get you a bunch of wins. He's just not going to win a national championship at Notre Dame. And I think, isn't that what everybody wants? They want a national championship. So if that's not what the coaches are thinking,
a year from now, it's all going to be moot. If they have the guy who they think is going to, like, the best guy for the job and is going to win him a national championship, nobody cares who it ends up being, right? I mean, whoever's number one, Riley Leonard is not going to have a perfect season. He's going to get picked apart too. And the first time he has a bad game, everyone's going to be going, or not everyone, but there'll be a faction going, see, I told you they should have just stuck with Angeli.
Well, and you know what the best part about this entire conversation is we're talking about who should be the number 2 quarterback. We're not even talking about who should start.
We're not talking about number 1. That's right.
You know what I mean?
About the battle for number 2.
And people are like, oh, he's not ready. For what? To hold a clipboard? Like, that's the conversation we're having.
He is the next man in if something happens to Riley.
That's true. And I kind of agree with Brian on this one, what he said, because then somebody came in and asked the exact same question to Brian on Saturday's show that was asked to us, who's going to end up being the number 2 quarterback. And he basically agreed with you that he thinks Angeli will be listed as the number 2 quarterback. And if Riley goes down in the middle of a game, they're going to bring in Steve and he'll get you through the game. Or if it's a 1-game situation, it'll be Steve Angeli to win you that game, that kind of a thing. If it is an extended period of time, 3, 4, 5 game stretch, I think they hand it off to CJ Carr. Right. That's what he thinks. And I think that's a pretty accurate statement. I do. I think that's a pretty accurate statement.
I wouldn't doubt that. And, like you're talking about whether or not Angeli could finish, like it's not like we ever get updates on where these guys stand academically. It's like,
True.
Well, he needs 6 more credits to graduate or
literally
whatever.
Privacy laws will prevent us from getting that in. I mean, technically parents can't even get the information from their kids unless their kids sign off on it.
Right. But, for like the people, well, Steve Angeli will never leave because he loves Notre Dame. I don't buy that, because if he does get passed, whether it's next spring or whenever, Steve Angeli is still going to want to go play. He's still going to want to play quarterback. He wants to be a quarterback. He thinks he should be a starting quarterback. And I don't blame him, for like having that mindset, because that's something you were saying. Maybe Steve Angeli thinks, he's even better than what he is. Confidence, again, there's always kind of that straddling line. But I guess my point is, he gets into next spring. I would be shocked if he doesn't, at least between the degree and the chance to be the starting quarterback. I would be shocked if he doesn't stay through next spring and battle to be the starting quarterback at Notre Dame in 2025. And if he comes out of the end of the spring and he's not at the top of the depth chart, I wouldn't blame him for transferring and going and pursuing an opportunity someplace else, because by the end of spring, by the end of next May or middle of next May, he should have his Notre Dame degree in hand, and he can go out and still have, a couple years of eligibility remaining. I did see somebody ask how many years Riley Leonard has. Riley Leonard has just 1 year of eligibility. This is a one and done situation.
Yes. Yep.
That's why basically all three of these guys you would expect are going to be in spring practice for Notre Dame, spring of 2025, battling to be the number one starting quarterback for Notre Dame in the 2025 fall season.
Absolutely. I think it'll be a fun competition, this time next year as to who's going to be the starter. I guess if I was going to put money down now, I would say it's going to be CJ Carr. I think that's the succession plan that this staff kind of sees. You get 2 straight years out of CJ Carr, plays really well. He leaves to go to the NFL after 3 years total, and then you hand it off to Deuce. I think that would be the plan that they would have. But if Kenny Minchie is patient and battles and is willing to stick it out, he could be the guy in 27. Absolutely he could be.
Right.
And I don't think Notre Dame fans would be all that upset about it, to be honest with you. I think Kenny Minchie is a good quarterback. Really do. So he can win you a lot of football games, Sean. Kenny Minchie can win you a lot of football games.
We didn't do the 4. We didn't do strength, weakness, ceiling, and
That's
floor
true.
For Kenny Minchie. So what do you think? Like, is just arm talent his greatest strength? Is that where you would 100%. Put it?
Yes,
yeah, I think 100%. So too.
Yep, the different angles. Arm talent is a great way to put it. Not just arm strength, but his arm talent, I think, is absolutely his strength.
Ability to throw off platform, and like you said, the ability to, that's the sign of a great athlete when he's able to do those things. Drop, change arm angles and just make a throw without even having to think about it. So I think that's the biggest thing.
Yeah, for sure.
Hossie says his confidence is a strength. I mean, it's a strength. I don't think it is his. I don't think it's his number one strength. I think that it is a strength for Minchie, though.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Weakness.
I
mean, you could say this for both Carr and Minchie, but experience is a weakness. I mean, he doesn't have it. Like I said, he was bouncing back and forth between the show team and the varsity. He hasn't, I think he got in the pit game for obvious reasons, but I think that was about it. So, his experience is definitely a detriment right now, but can't get experience until you get it. That's what I hate about, when you don't get a job because you don't have experience. Well, how the heck are you supposed to get experience without getting a job?
Exactly.
So I would just put that in a slight negative category. And I would say processing to a degree, but I think a lot of that comes from experience. I think those two things are kind of intertwined when it comes to Kenny. I've seen him get better at pulling the trigger as he has progressed through the spring. Yeah. Right. And so I'm not as worried about that as I am from Steve, because I've seen Steve now for 3 springs and I don't think it's gotten a whole lot better, but I've seen it get better with Kenny. Does that make sense? Like that's kind of how I feel about
Minchie.
that.
Again, like we're talking about closing the gap. Minchie has closed that gap on Angeli in the time that he's been here. Like there's a little bit of a flat line for Angeli, I think. Whereas Minchie still is at least got a little peak, like heading toward a spike.
Yeah,
he hasn't reached that plateau yet. I think that it's still trending up for him in that department. And that's the thing,
Absolutely.
just the processing and making his reads, I think, are his weakness right now. And then that, that does come with experience, but you do also continue to get some of that in practice.
Right.
So what's his ceiling? What's his floor?
So I'm trying to do this the same way I did Steve Angeli. It's like the ceiling and floor as far as from a wins-loss scenario. I feel like his ceiling should be slightly higher than Steve's. I think it should be slightly higher, but how much higher this year in 24? You know what I mean? Like, I think overall his ceiling is absolutely higher than Steve's.
Well, I mean,
overall.
The field, not like if you were looking at this season specifically, and
they're pretty similar.
They're similar, but I think in those games against some of the better competition, I think maybe he gives you a little bit better chance. Yeah, between his ability to move and the fact that I think the field becomes bigger. I don't think that the field is quite as confined as it is with Steve Angeli because of the arm. And he has shown a willingness, and he has not just the willingness, but the ability to get to get the ball downfield.
It's a really good point
with the arm that he has.
That's a really, really good point, Sean. I completely agree with that. I would say so if Steve was 10 and then 8 for me, then I think Kenny is like 11 and 9. Like that, I would just put him a tick above, because I do think he gives you an opportunity to win 11 games, and I also think he gives you an opportunity to win a playoff game,
right,
as well.
And I just think, again, like for anyone, who's come on here and like you're not talking about Minchie enough, that's not. He is just caught in a very unique situation.
Yeah.
Where again, like if CJ Carr. What's it like if you didn't have one of the better quarterback, prospects that you've had in the last several years on the roster, who, oh, by the way, also showed great ability, to do all those things that we've talked about during the spring. If he's not here, I think the future looks a lot, at least the next couple of years, look a lot different for Kenny Minchie. But you can't just push CJ Carr out of the picture. He is here, and that's why Kenny is just caught in a little bit of a numbers game right now, is what it is.
I feel like, and I hate to say this for Kenny, because I think he made the right choice coming to Notre Dame, and if he ends up with his degree, he's going to be better off. But if he would have stayed at Pitt, he'd probably be their starting quarterback right now.
Right.
I mean, I do believe that. I think he is that talented that would happen. So just based on what I'm seeing here from Pitt, who's, they were 3-9 last year. They're predicted to be 14th in the ACC, according to various magazines and things like that. And so I feel like he's better than Nate Yarnell at Pitt. You know what I mean? So
yeah.
He's in a very unfortunate situation where they brought in Riley Leonard above him, and you got CJ Carr hard charging from behind. And so it's just a bad situation for him to be in.
Yeah. Like DK is saying, Carr committed first, but Minchie got here first. He's a year ahead of him.
A year in the program.
And again, he's got confidence in his ability. I mean, I'm sure he came here thinking, look, I'm going to get here. I'm going to win the job. I mean, that's what you want from a guy, like you don't, with all this, recruiting and bringing in talent and everything else, like you want guys who aren't just going to say, well, they're bringing in a guy who's higher rated than me, I'm just going to go someplace else. You want guys who are going to step up and have the confidence that they can win that job. And all it's going to do is make your program better. But as we've talked about before as well, bringing in all that talent also means that, especially at the quarterback position, there can be only one guy. So guys are going to leave at some point.
Yeah. Well, and let's say Kenny Minchie is your day one starter this year. Like let's be in that bizarro world where that's the case. I see him getting so much better from the beginning of the season to the end of the season. I see that growth possibility in him with more playing time and making the offense fit his abilities, which I think Mike Denbrock would do, that kind of a thing. I think he would be just fine. I would be very nervous going into the Texas A&M game and that environment and the whole thing, rightfully so. But then he's got like 4 get-right games, after that. And I think you would see him just get progressively better, and better, and that includes his decision-making.
Right. I just think, like the standout play for me from the blue gold game, like when you think about CJ Carr, when he starts to make that little roll to the left and he's looking over toward the sideline and he calls the receiver, like he stops and he kind of waves the receiver to come back to him. And then, he drops it to, was it Gilbert? I can't remember if that one was Gilbert as well, but do you remember which one
I don't.
I'm talking about? It's just like, again, it's just like the poise, the moxie for a guy who is a true freshman, early enrollee, to like the presence that he has. It's just a completely different vibe that he has on the field in comparison to those other guys. And that's why everyone is, so high on Carr in the future that he's got.
Mm-hmm.
So. All right, Vince, are you ready for rapid fire?
Are we there already? Yeah, let's go,
we
baby.
We are. We're going to continue. We're going to continue quarterback talk in rapid fire. Scale of 1 to 10. What's your confidence in Notre Dame as a playoff team with Riley Leonard as quarterback? And what would it be if Steve Angeli was the starter with no Leonard on the roster?
I mean, nothing is an absolute, so I'm not going to go 10 out of 10 here at the beginning, but it's like 9 out of 10 that Notre Dame's a playoff team with Riley Leonard. I have a hard time not seeing them as a playoff team, okay? And so it's like a 9.5. Like, I see this as a playoff team with Riley Leonard if he's healthy for 12 games. If Steve Angeli was the starter, I would drop that to 50-50. So 5 out of 10 because, like I said before, I think the ceiling is 10 wins, and a 10-2 Notre Dame team is going to need help to get in my opinion. And so will they get that help? And what were those losses? Where were they? When were, all of those different things? How bad were they? What were the wins like? There's so much that goes into it that a 10-win Notre Dame team, I think, might be on the outside looking in. So it's 50-50. So that's why I got to give it a 5 out of 10.
That's exactly where my numbers are. 9 with Riley Leonard would be my confidence. 5 would be my confidence with Angeli. They will be, they would, if there's no Riley Leonard and it is just Steve Angeli, they would be in the running for a college football playoff spot. But it's essentially going to come down to how they perform at Texas A&M.
Sure.
Louisville,
Florida State
is a question. I still feel really confident.
I do too.
In the Louisville game this year. But Florida State and USC. I mean, it's ultimately going to come down to those 3 games. I can see Angeli winning at least, much more confident in USC until we see what their defense is going to be like this year with a new defensive coordinator. But I feel much more confident there than either of the other 2 because you've got to go on the road to Texas A&M to open up the season. Like when you talk about experience, huge factor with Riley Leonard, obviously.
Oh my
and
gosh.
then, what it's going to look like against Florida State at home as well.
Yeah, I like Notre Dame's chances going into A&M with a quarterback who's got 19 starts under his belt, I think is what Riley Leonard has, and he's played in big games and he's done big things, right? And so I feel real good about him going in there, leading this team offensively and all that. The defense is going to shut out the noise. I'm not worried about the defense. And you got a kicker who's literally played at Texas A&M before. And so, yeah, I feel pretty darn good about Notre Dame's chances there.
Yeah,
with the starters they're going to play.
No, again, and like it essentially boils down to those games, like Riley Leonard's ability to win those games. That's why they brought Riley Leonard in to win games like that, to get them to the playoff. And if they didn't think that Riley Leonard was going to give them a huge leg up in games like that, they never would have brought him in. But again, like Texas A&M on the road to open the season was going to be a tough game anyway between the environment and the defense that Elko is going to throw out there on the field. But if it's Riley Leonard as your starting quarterback or Angeli as your starting quarterback, those are 2 completely kind of games. And again, your confidence that Angeli can make plays down the field and be a true, playmaker for you in that kind of game, in that kind of environment. That's why you've got Riley Leonard.
Yep. They went and got him for a reason.
Yeah.
Let's just put it that way. And it's a mutually beneficial marriage. There's no doubt about it. I mean, he was a dark horse first round NFL draft pick going into his junior year and then got hurt. And now he's going to use Notre Dame's roster and Notre Dame's image and Notre Dame's everything else. He watched it happen with Hartman, right? As far as all the off the field stuff. And any quarterback worth his salt is going to be like, I can play better than he did. And so I can take Notre Dame to the promised land. Like, why would I not do that? And then he will if he does what we think he's capable of doing, he will vault himself into the first round of the NFL draft.
Right. So one of the writers from The Athletic was down at the Manning Passing Academy, and he talked to several different quarterbacks who were down there about the transfer portal, and Riley Leonard was one of them. So here's the question that he asked Riley Leonard. Is it the norm now for a quarterback to almost expect to have to transfer at some point? Leonard responded. I think that's a tricky question because it's not something I never wanted to be a transfer quarterback. I never see myself as a guy that would turn my back on anything. So it's really hard to make the best decision for yourself while juggling the fact that there are so many people you're going to leave behind. I don't know if it really still sits well with me or any of these guys. Like, none of us are like, oh, we're going to go in the portal. We're going to go and do this. It's tough. It really is. I hope that people aren't going into programs thinking, if I don't get the job, I'm going to transfer. But it's also crazy seeing all this movement, and guys are having to play politics in the locker room. Start this guy in the spring so he doesn't transfer, and this and that. That's a quote from Riley Leonard. So what do you think about that, Vince?
I think he's answering that about as honestly as he could possibly answer it. When he went into Duke in 2021, he wasn't thinking he's going to transfer. Like, that was never even a thought. If he doesn't get hurt, he's in the NFL right now. That's how I see it. And so he wasn't ever thinking about transferring, but the opportunity presented itself and he took it. I think the mentality in 2024 is different than it was in 2021 because of the way the transfer portal is being used and because of NIL and all of those different scenarios. I don't know if any quarterback, I shouldn't say any, I don't know if most of quarterbacks commit to a school thinking that they're going to transfer. I just don't think the mentality is that. I think it's maybe in the back of their mind, like, if things don't work out, I can always leave, kind of a deal. But I think any kid that commits to a program is thinking, I'm going to be the guy that takes this program where we want it to go.
Sure.
You know what I mean? So I don't think anybody goes in with the intent of transferring. I just think they know they've got that trap door if they need it. Now, I also think it's very interesting, his last part there, where he started talking about, we got to start this guy in the spring so he doesn't transfer, right?
Right.
I feel like the politics of everything is a very interesting topic. And I wonder how the kids, the players feel and the coaches feel and all of those different things. If I was a conspiracy theorist, I could make the argument that they're keeping Steve Angeli at number 2 right now because they didn't want him to transfer.
I mean, right? It's the first thing that I thought of when I saw that. It's like, wow, that's, it's like whether he intended that or not, but I mean, It applies to the situation that was going on potentially, like, again,
right.
Like, you could apply it if you wanted to. How much of that was going on? I don't know.
Just saying. I mean, he's right there in the thick of it. So he could be referring to a topic that he's talking about, that he's experiencing right now, or it could be a hypothetical that he's hearing other guys talk about. I mean, he was down there with a lot of other quarterbacks, a lot of them transfers,
right?
And so I'm sure he's heard a bunch of stories, but it gets you thinking.
No, for sure. And I mean, look, the situation that he's in, he had kind of, it seems like, made up his mind before the season even ended, before Mike Elko pulled the trigger and took off to Texas A&M, that he was going to go into the portal. I think that ultimately a program like Duke probably peaked with where they were and, what Mike Elko was going to be able to get out of it. And obviously Elko does go to Texas A&M, and here comes Riley Leonard. Now, there's some similarities, though, obviously, between a guy like Riley Leonard and a guy like Sam Hartman. Both performed in the ACC. Both have performed against Power 5 opponents, but they've also both outperformed what their recruiting ranking was coming out of high school. Like, they both elevated that, somewhat similar to like Liza Carlin, the Notre Dame women's basketball player, who coming out of, like, we talked about the portal a little bit when I had her on the show a few weeks ago about the biggest difference when you're getting recruited into the portal is, okay, now teams have a sample size on you. They see what you've actually done against much better competition over an extended period of time. So like Leonard obviously isn't transferring because he was going to lose a starting job to anybody. He's transferring because his status is now elevated compared to when he was coming out of Fairhope, Alabama, going to Duke a couple of years ago. And it's just like with Sam Hartman, his profile is going to be raised exponentially as well because of the fact that he is at Notre Dame instead of at Duke or a Wake Forest. So there's obviously a lot that goes into it. He's going to legit have a chance to win a national championship, or at least play for a national championship, in the college football playoff that he's going to have by being at a place like Notre Dame as opposed to Duke at a very minimum. And then what you said, like his draft status, he's going to have a chance to just jack that right back up there as well, because he's going to be playing with a lot more around him. And now in an offense that's going to be, just so juiced up compared to what he was in when he was at Duke as well.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. This next question, Jay Lehman, he is at least a somewhat regular listener, viewer of the show. I saw him tweet this last week. Notre Dame fan. Is there a Notre Dame football player we're not talking about right now, but we will be talking about by the end of the season? And I thought this would be worthy of discussing. And I know I can see the torment on your face, because like when I threw this out to you, you were like, we talk about everybody. How can anybody even fit this bill? So this is sort of like, who's at least somewhat below the radar right now, a few weeks out from training camp, who we could be talking about in a much different light? Do you at least have some candidates we can throw out and debate?
Yeah, I think I've got some candidates for sure. I think surprisingly,
who's the first one that came to the top of your head?
We don't talk about Mitchell Evans very often because he's injured. And I think he has the potential of being an All-America candidate at tight end, partly because of what I think his stats are going to be, and I think what his role is going to be on this team, and the fact that he plays tight end at Notre Dame. I think all those things play into his favor. We don't talk about him very much because obviously he's been injured, and I think you could say the exact same thing for Eli Raridan.
See, he was going to be the tight end that I was going to say.
Okay,
like
fair
because of Mitchell Evans coming back, it's like, Mitchell Evans got to get out there a little bit in the spring, but not a whole lot because he is coming back from the injury. But I think that because Evans is coming back, there's at least more conversation on him than there is a guy like Eli Raridan, for example.
Yeah.
So I kind of like Raridan was the one I was thinking about.
Okay,
tight ends.
Fair enough. Another guy that I don't think is getting a lot of love because I think everybody just thinks he's going to be returning kicks is Jaden Harrison. I think we could be talking about him. I feel like they're going to find a way on offense to get him the football. And I don't think he needs more than 4 touches a game on average, but I think those 4 touches could be dynamic. And I think we could all be talking about Jaden Harrison and his impact offensively, not just because I think he's going to do great in the kick return game and, all of that. I think he's going to be great. But I think
purely as a wide receiver.
Yes, I think that we're kind of, and I fall into this category as well prior to the spring, but we saw him do some things in the spring because of, the fact that Jordan Faison wasn't at practice because he was doing lacrosse. He had some opportunities to do some stuff with the football in his hands offensive. I was like, okay, I don't think you can ignore the talent that he has. And I feel like he's kind of a forgotten man a little bit right now.
I think that's a really good one. I think that he might, because I didn't even think about him. I thought about 5 or 6 different guys. But again, this is hard because we do this 5 days a week.
Exactly.
And
sometimes multiple times a day.
Yeah, that's right. Brian's doing it. We're doing it. They're like so many different guys who we end up talking about that I think it's hard to, for us, to truly find a below the radar type guy. But I think that Jaden Harrison, purely as a wide receiver, is a really good one, because even when he came in the door, the first thing they're saying was like, look, this is going to be a kickoff guy. And he's electrifying kickoff guy. And he's received
All-American.
Received some preseason All-American honors. He was an All-American at the end of last season at Marshall. Now, you do have to wonder a little bit, because the level of competition, both for him and Chris Mitchell, is going to be elevated. And how much difference that potentially makes, I guess we'll find out. But I think that I think that's a good one from a purely offensive standpoint, because I don't think any of us have like a real idea of just how much Jaden Harrison is going to be involved in the actual offensive game plan this season.
Exactly. I think that's a huge piece of it. I feel good about it because of Mike Denbrock and who he is and all of those different things, but I am very curious to see what they do, because look, they've got dynamic slots already on the team. I mean,
right.
You've got Jaden Greathouse, you've got
Jordan Faison, right.
And you got Jaden Thomas, who has been the most effective in the slot, to be honest with you.
Right.
And I'm not saying that's his primary position, but when he's there, it's a matchup nightmare, right? And so it's kind of stacked up there. And you got KK Smith, who I believe is a slot guy. So there's a lot of bodies there. And so how do they juggle that? You know what I mean?
Well, and that's like the receivers I thought of. Again, I think that yours is probably even better by going with Harrison, but Jaden Thomas and Deion Colsey, because of the fact that you've added Bo Collins and Chris Mitchell to be outside guys, and especially Bo Collins, they're on the boundary, like with, like that's where we expect Jaden Thomas to play more. That's where Deion Colsey's best position is, at the boundary. But Bo Collins has proven much more than either one of those other two guys that he can go out and be the guy. So maybe he ends up being that. But, for that reason, it's definitely, there's not nearly as much expectation on either Thomas or Colsey, I feel like, going into this season.
That's a good point. And I think because of their history, I think they're already kind of forgotten about, unfortunately. Right. You know what I mean? And they both have a ton of talent. They got a ton of talent. And if they can stay healthy and they can, fix some off the field stuff and, just check all the boxes, they could be a huge part to this rotation. There's no doubt.
DK says KK Smith. I mean, I think that's valid as well, because of these other guys, unless, which I do think this will happen, like Jaden Greathouse, as we talked about before, he's not just going to play slot, he's going to play on the outside as well. So like you've got Chris Mitchell over there and KK Smith, theoretically anyway, the number 2 behind him. But is he going to get more opportunity, or like does Greathouse maybe take some of those opportunities away, like if he's out there instead? I don't know.
KK Smith he's a very talented kid, and I think his time will come at Notre Dame, because they are going to lose a bunch of guys after this season. I just think he's got a lot of bodies to jump over to get on the field and be a productive member of the offense this year. It's definitely possible, but I think he's got his work cut out for him. I'll just put it that way.
Right. I feel like defense is almost even tougher to come up with some names over there.
Jaden Ausberry, maybe, but I don't know what exactly his role is going to be, since he's kind of playing 2 positions,
floating around all over the place. Yeah.
Yep. I mean, he's a super talented kid, and I think he can help this defense. And I think he's going to be in some sort of a rotation. But are people not talking about him? Because I feel like we are. Is your average fan talking about a Don Schuler? Because I think he's going to be an integral part of this defense. But he was getting starters reps all spring. So is he really a kid we're not talking about?
But that's also because Rod Hurd wasn't
Absolutely.
here. So, like how much is that going to, it'll definitely impact Don Schuler's reps or whatever he gets. But I do still think that Schuler ends up out there on the field. Like, I think that there'll probably be some times where we see 3 safeties out there on the field this season. We'll see all 3 of those guys, Hurd, Watts, and Schuler out there. That's kind of what I'm thinking right now. But like Schuler, finished the spring really nicely. He gave us something to talk. Like you mentioned Ausberry. What's weird to me is, for as much as everyone talked about Jalen Sneed, his first 2 years, you don't hear nearly as much of that now that he's legitimately in line to get more playing opportunity this year. Like, we haven't talked about him nearly as much as some of these other guys, I feel like, this offseason.
That's interesting. I didn't think about that. Look at you.
Mic drop. Should I just leave the show now?
Coming off at the top ropes.
That's right.
It's good stuff. I'll give it to you.
yes, I got a bell. But Josh Burnham, and I think it's funny because like I've been sitting here looking at the chat and I saw, like a name or two kind of thrown out there, but like I thought we'd see, more people kind of throwing it. I think that just shows how difficult this really is because, again, it's like people who tune into the shows on the regular, they've seen all these names kicked around. Like they're just, that's what makes it so hard to, I think, come up with some of these guys. Unless they're true freshmen walking in the door, I think it's really tough. But like, what about a guy like Josh Burnham? I know we've said Josh Burnham from time to time, but he's got RJ Oben over there as well. I still feel like Josh Burnham can be a guy who provides at least pretty good impact for the Irish this season, in tandem out there. Not at the same time, obviously, but, on the two deep there with Oben at that big defensive end spot. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I think you're going to see a rotation of about 11 guys on the defensive line this year. And it could swell to even more than that. But I think, there's 11 guys that are going to play on the defensive line. Pick one. You know what I mean? Like, I think we're at one point or another, we're going to talk about all 11 of those guys, all of them. And I think you could make a case that Burnham or Oben or, name a defensive lineman isn't getting enough talk because there's 9 to 10 other guys that are also going to be getting time. So the defensive line is a kind of an enigma, in my opinion, because there's going to be so much rotation there because the talent is that deep. They're going to go 11 deep, man. Like
I agree.
That's healthy.
I agree. Tommy's saying the Bo Show.
No, of course, Tommy's saying the Bo Show.
Yes.
People are talking about Bo Collins plenty. I think he's going to be a starter. I think we're all talking about him.
I'm surprised Salty hasn't said we don't talk about Jaden Greathouse enough.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and here's the other thing. I think, and I'm not saying people aren't talking about him because they're talking about him, but for all the wrong reasons. Everybody thinks Drake Bowen is going to get passed up and not be a good middle linebacker. They just all think Kingston is going to just come in and just push the young gun aside.
He has been over for a guy who had as much hype as he had coming in.
Man.
Drake Bowen, he really, all the talk is about Kingston Viliamu-Asa. That's for sure.
Which, I get it. He deserves all the hype that he's getting. But did we forget Drake Bowen and what he's going to be able to do on the field? Like,
right.
He's going to be really good, folks. He's going to be really good. You don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater because eventually those two are both going to be playing at the same time. It doesn't have to be one or the other.
Exactly. I'm trying to think of other potentials like Trey or, like Bubakar Traore. Again, he's been brought up to some extent, but I think a lot of it is just because people are kind of over Jordan Botelho at this point in his career. Yeah. It's still put up or shut up right now, I think, as far as most people are kind of thinking with Botelho. And so, by default, I think Traore has got some talk, but we still don't really know maybe what to expect from him this year. But we wouldn't be surprised if we saw big things from Traore just based on what we saw from him in the spring.
I think so. Yeah, the kid's a physical specimen. I mean, he's just super long, super athletic. I mean, he's going to make plays. There's no doubt about it.
Should we be talking about one of the freshman corners at this point?
Possibly. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of talent there, so I don't have a problem talking about them. You know what I mean? I don't know realistically how much playing time they're going to have.
I mean, the only thing that gets them any sort of meaningful playing time is if the Morrison injury goes longer than they're saying it might go, right?
Right. Yeah. I hope that they don't have to. How about that? I hope they don't have to, but I do want to see them get some playing time because if you think about what the secondary is going to look like going into next season, they're going to have to play. So I want them to get time this year so they're not coming in completely cold, but I don't know that we're necessarily going to be quote unquote talking about them, on a regular basis.
Hossie says, what about our big bad Aussie punter? I mean, like, I hope you're joking. I hope you're like being a little sarcastic because like, has there been a punter who has had more hype on him than James Rendell, or the Thor, whatever you want to call him?
You're not kidding, man. Like, he stole all the thunder from the 30-year-old kicker. That's for sure.
Right.
Yeah,
no kidding.
Because he's actually going to play, which would be the difference. But I hope all the hype is legit. I really do. But I need to see him kick a couple of balls before I jump on the hype train. I'll just leave it at that.
Right.
There's plenty of big athletic looking dudes that I've seen walk on into a camp situation, at all these kicking camps, and they're terrible. And I'm not saying this kid's going to be terrible, but what I am saying is kicking and punting are not get off the bus and be impressed positions. You know what I mean? Because I can tell you right now, the most athletic looking kid is sometimes the worst, and the goofiest looking MFer is usually the best. It's amazing.
Well, look at Blake Groupie, like the guy's kicking in the NFL. And,
seriously,
he looks like Opie Taylor.
Right. I'm telling you, man, you just never know. Now, if I had the to pick, I would love for my kid to be like 6'2", 220, because he can get, all of his ass into it and get the ball going. But that's not always the case.
Let's not get into physiques and your kid and all that.
Let's go down that road again. That's not what I meant. That's not what I meant at all. But I'm just saying, like, he looks the part. There's no doubt. He's like straight out of Central Casting when you're talking about like an Aussie football player, coming over to the States to play football, the whole thing. Straight out of Central Casting. I just hope he can produce. That's all.
Yeah. I mean, bottom line is, I feel like under the radar guys are just really hard to find right now.
Yes. Because this roster is so deep.
Yeah.
This roster is so deep, and we know a lot about it, and we talk about a lot of guys.
And kind of like the quarterbacks, sort of like everyone's got their pet guy, I think, who they're like more interested in the others and really, wants to see them go. And like even Gerby Lambert, like the fact that you've got a true freshman coming in, and, if you polled the, like the fan base, you'd probably get a very high, like the diehards who are watching this show. Of course, they know who Gerby Lambert is. They're watching this show. They're watching Brian's show. They're, they listen to,
of course,
to Ryan, and they're paying attention to the recruiting. Of course, you know who Gerby Lambert is, but otherwise, like, fan base at large might not be as up on him, but there's a high percentage of people who are obviously expecting Lambert to come right in and compete for that right tackle spot right away. Maybe he does, but he's not going to be below the radar because plenty of people have talked about him and thrown his name out there already.
He's talked about a lot by the recruitniks and all of those different things,
Yes. Salty making the point with his own sarcasm. Really? Do any of us have one particular player on whom we focus excessively? I like your proper grammar, by the way. And by the way, I don't know how I said Boubacar's name earlier. Tommy, was correcting me.
To give you crap about
it? Maybe I said Boubacar. I don't know. Maybe it's because of the tuna, that I like albacore, that I had for lunch today. I don't know.
Yeah.
But every once in a while, I just feel like a tuna fish sandwich.
Yeah. Tommy thinks Thor is going to force 2 fumbles. I don't want my punter anywhere near a tackle. If the punter's making tackles and forcing fumbles, you got a big problem. You got a big problem on your hands. I'll just say that.
Yep, that's for sure. All right, which is the bigger deal? Howard Cross and Xavier Watts getting first-team preseason All-American honors, or Notre Dame women's basketball player Kassan Prosper playing for the Canadian Olympic women's team?
You're not going to like this, but I'm going the football way.
You're allowed to go with I throw this out there. Open it up.
My reasoning is this. Notre Dame has had people on their women's basketball team on Team Canada in the past. It's a great honor. It's awesome, but they'd be fools not to have her on the team. So I almost feel like it's understood and it should just happen. The other guys, they deserve it. I think it is a big deal that they're there. This preseason stuff is kind of a name only kind of a deal. Like, nobody cares at the end of the year who the preseason lists were. You know what I mean? And so at the end of the day, you don't really win anything. It's just kind of a nice thing to have. And I'm like basically talking myself into going the other direction here.
Yeah, that's why, to me.
Yeah, because Cass earned it. She's actually on the team.
Like the way you're going, like the only All-American teams I care about are postseason after this season.
Yeah,
like the
100%.
Preseason stuff, it's nice, but it's basically like, oh, it's out there right now. Your preseason and stuff like that. Yeah.
So I just talked myself into going the other direction.
Back the other direction.
Yep.
Well, and what I would add to that is, one, you've got an active player who is on the Olympic team, and two, like for Prosper specifically, I think it's even doubly good that she's able to play on the Canadian Olympic team, because she missed all but 5 games last season with an injury. So the fact that she is able to get back up and play at full strength is huge news right now, because that means, obviously, assuming nothing, knock on wood, nothing crazy happens while she's over there in Paris. She gets to go back to Paris, by the way, where she started, the college season last year. I just actually even thought about that. But
look at you.
The fact that she's healthy enough to play, I think, is a great sign for Notre Dame.
Sure.
When she gets back from the Olympics and gets back in with the team, because she was injured almost all of last season.
Just makes that depth chart that much deeper.
Yep. Just one more piece.
I feel bad for Niele. She's got a lot. I don't feel bad for her because she's got a Final Four roster, but that's a lot of people that deserve minutes. You know what I mean? And I don't know if there's enough to go around.
And Cass specifically, Prosper, like what she does for them defensively when she's out there with that length that she provides at the top and that wingspan, she covers so much space out there. That is just huge to be able to get her back. And that was something that was missing, obviously, for a great deal of last season. Fill in the blank. It's blank that Cal football will travel 24,000 miles for its 5 road games this season against Auburn, Florida State, Pittsburgh, Wake Forest, and SMU in its first season as a member of the ACC.
Hilarious. I think it's hilarious, and I think that is the downfall of the stupid conference expansion. And one of my friends put it very concisely: nobody forced you in there. Nobody forced you to the ACC. So don't complain. I don't know if they're complaining, because somebody else, I believe.
The alternative is you're trying to make a go of it as an independent.
The Mountain West or in the Mountain West or whatever. With the other leftover Pac-12 teams, right?
Right.
And so, this is what you get, man. Like, you made your bed, now you get to fly over it. I don't know. I think the tweet said something along the lines of the entire circumference of the world is 24,400 or something like that.
24,900.
Okay, there you go. So
yes. Fortunately, they're not making all these trips consecutively. There is,
correct.
It's there and back, and nobody's making them go to Auburn, for example.
I would love to see the travel that like the track team is going to have, and the baseball team, and the volleyball team, and the soccer team.
Everyone's going to have a lot. Like, that's just
I realize football gets the publicity. But how about all those other schools and most of our teams, those other teams, and most of those teams played during the week.
Yeah.
So, interesting.
Yeah. We haven't seen, like you're talking about basketball, we haven't seen the final basketball schedules come out this year. We do know, like from the women's perspective, they will not go to the West Coast for Cal and Stanford this year. It'll be next year. Dallas as well. But a lot of these other schools are going to be in that same boat. Like, you're just looking at them, like there are going to be a lot of others that are going to be in the same boat when it comes to those, because they're going to have to make that trip out west to play Cal and Stanford, and they're going to have to play at SMU in the same season. And, like Notre Dame potentially next year will have to go to the West Coast, to Dallas, and also to, maybe at least one of the Florida schools, either Florida State or Miami.
Yeah.
for example. So, yeah, all these other lower revenue sports are going to have to make a lot more sacrifices because they're going to be doing it during the week as well, not just one day a week on Saturdays. So, but like you said, I mean, the alternative is you're either playing in a lesser conference or, you're doing what Oregon State is trying to do and you're independent right now. So, I mean, that's what it took to keep you kind of, among the upper echelon of the Power Four or whatever. So,
right.
you got to dance with it.
Yep.
Back to more basketball. Fill in the blank. Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese making the WNBA All-Star game, which will pit the All-Stars against the U.S. Olympic team. Means blank.
This is a tough one for me because I'm trying to figure out a good way to say it within the confines of the question. It means they have an opportunity to prove to the Olympic Selection Committee that they shouldn't have been left off the team. How about that? So I'm excited. I think this is a great format because it gives these ladies who were left off the team an opportunity to shove it right back in their face. And I think that's awesome. That's what sports is all about.
Yeah. I mean, it's the two best rookies in the WNBA this season. Angel Reese breaking the record for all the double-doubles in a row, and Caitlin Clark over the weekend also. I don't know if you saw that. The first WNBA rookie ever to have a triple-double, and there was all the controversy. Caitlin Clark got left off the Olympic team. Well, now she gets to play against the Olympians in an all-star game. So I think it's pretty apropos. It's pretty cool that they'll both get to go out there and do that. So
I think it's awesome,
yeah.
Frankly. Yeah. I actually might tune into that game. Be the first WNBA game I would have watched all year.
I roll up on some of the Caitlin Clark.
Do you?
From time to time. Yeah.
They've only won 9 games, Sean. Like, yikes. I think that's the last thing I saw in the standings.
But it's already, I believe, an improvement from what they did last year.
Well, they were picking first. So
yeah. And they've still played more games, I believe. I don't know if it's still, but at least, as of a couple of weeks ago, they had played more games than anybody else. And they had also played, basically they're playing a TV schedule because the fact that they have Caitlin Clark, so they were front loading all these games against, big competition, New York and Vegas and, all these different playoff type teams. All right, Vince, when you go to a baseball game, I'm curious, where does popcorn rank among your food choices?
Pretty low, to be honest with you. It is, I'm not really a huge popcorn at a game guy. I don't know why. I think in my brain, because
you and I are both popcorn fiends in general.
Like I love popcorn.
Popcorn, right?
I think in my skewed brain, though, popcorn is for the movies. Like I love like too much love for the movie theater popcorn situation. So I one thing and one thing only at the ballpark: peanuts. I love shelling the nuts because it keeps me busy.
Yeah.
And it's a good snack. Obviously have like a beverage, a cold, tasty beverage. But I love shelling the peanuts, throwing them on the ground, eating the peanuts, and keeping score. Like that is my routine when I am at the ballpark.
I was thinking about this when I was at that game in Toronto when we were on vacation a couple of weeks ago, because I saw these big old buckets, people with big old buckets of popcorn, and it looked good. But I'm thinking the exact same thing as you. It's like we're obviously conditioned for what kind of food we're going to get based on where you are. When I go to a movie, I've got to have my movie theater popcorn. Like my wife will smuggle in some of her own popcorn from time to time, but it's like I want the movie theater popcorn when I'm at a movie. When I'm at a ballpark, that's one of the last things that I want. The peanuts are a good one. I actually bought a bag of peanuts when we went to the game there in Toronto. Nachos are at the top of the list for me.
Ooh, yeah. Do you get all the crap on the nachos? Like the jalapenos and like maybe some meat, all that stuff?
As much as possible.
Do you? Okay.
Yes. Definitely the jalapenos, which, by the way, when we were in Toronto, there were only 4 concessions of all the concession stands, that they had on the main mezzanine level, only 4 that sold the nachos. and we had to walk all over the place to find them.
Wow.
We asked for jalapenos, and you know what they came back with? Like the sliced fresh jalapenos, not the pickled jalapenos, like out of a jar. So it's like raw jalapenos, basically, which I just threw away. There's no way I was eating those.
Dang Canadians.
But yeah, jalapenos are at the top. A brat. I like a good brat every now and then if I can find it, depending on where we are. But
I've had like a Philly cheesesteak at the ballpark, like that kind of, like I've done that kind of stuff before, but you know, that's expensive, man.
You know what?
Those sandwiches are crazy.
You know what I haven't had at a South Bend Cubs game, which I hear are really good? They've actually got Philly cheesesteak nachos out there.
Interesting.
South Bend Cubs game, which I'd still like to try sometime, but I never have.
We need to go to a game is what needs to happen. We should go to a game because I want to take my kids. I don't know that they would actually sit there. They would go off and do the kid stuff.
Yeah.
But like I would like to sit there, keep score, watch the game, do the whole thing. So we need to make that happen before the end of the summer.
We should do that. Like within the next probably couple of weeks, we need to look at the schedule because
probably true.
Training camp starts in 3 weeks. So
let me ask you this.
Okay.
You're a movie guy.
Right.
And I don't know if I've asked you this before, and if I have, well, you can just repeat it. It's good content.
Okay.
Are you going to see the Kevin Costner Western that's out? Do you have any desire to see that?
You know what? It's funny that you mentioned that because
it's a 3-hour movie, by the way.
I know. I wouldn't say I loved Kevin Costner, but like in his prime, Bull Durham, obviously.
Sports movies are huge. Love them.
Great movie. Yeah, like all the sports movies that he was in. Went to see it like The Untouchables. I'm sure have you seen that at some point?
Long time ago. Time ago.
No Way Out. Really good, kind of underrated. One of his first big movies from the 80s. You should check that out at some point. It's like a spy kind of thriller. But I mean, and then Dances with Wolves, of course. Like that Kevin Costner, mid 80s to probably mid 90s. I was always in. I don't know. Something about him, I just haven't been as in on. Like in his
you haven't watched Yellowstone either.
No, I haven't. That needs to
happen.
Westerns I like, but like a 3-hour Western with Kevin Costner,
that's a lot. And
I know
it's part 1.
Oh, that's right, because it's not even like
part 2 is in August.
I just don't know.
Like, I don't know if I kind of want to see it because there's really not a whole lot else out there right now that making me want to go see it. You know what I mean? But I don't know if I want to commit myself not only to the 3 hours for this movie, but then the additional 3 hours in August when things ramp up a little bit in my life in the fall for obvious reasons. So I don't know. I just don't know if I'm ready to go all in on it or not.
Do we know what they're doing in these Costner movies? USMA 87 says the reviews have not been great. Like, are they rustling cattle or are they
I don't know.
Cattle? Like what?
Supposedly this is like his passion project. Like this is something that he's always wanted to do. He spent his own money, like the whole thing. Like this is his, it's his baby. But I have no idea what the plot line is. I have no idea.
Yeah, like a 3-hour Kevin Costner Western just is not pushing my button right now.
See, Joe Allen says Tuesday $6 movie day might make it worth it. If you go to the theater in Niles, it's $4 if you go at like 10:30 in the morning.
Josh is in the same boat as me. Liked him. I don't know.
All right.
I don't know. He seems like a different Kevin, like older Kevin Costner is a much different Kevin Costner.
Well, if you watch him in Yellowstone, he is a much different Kevin Costner, let me tell you.
Okay.
Now, he lacks a little bit of morals. I'll say that.
Man. Hossie says, completely fair and unbiased. He says the concession food at guaranteed rate, night and day better than the food at Wrigley.
White Sox, right?
Yeah.
It has to be. It's the only way to get anybody in the door.
Very true.
I'm sorry, but are you okay? I realize the Cubs are in last place, and so are the White Sox, but the Cubs have won, I think, 20 more games than the White Sox. So what are you going to White Sox games for? You're not going for the baseball.
Yep.
So you got to be going for the concessions.
So at Cleveland, and I can't think of the name of what the actual name of the field that used to be Jacobs Field. When we've been there to some games with
Cleveland.
Jesse,
yeah,
they've got this awesome nacho. It's like a nacho bar, and like you go through, and you can get them in the helmet, like the batting helmet, and they've got like different meats, like you can get pulled chicken and beef and steak, whatever. You can get different meats, different cheeses, different salsas, all this different stuff, like your choice as you go through the nacho bar. It's probably the best nacho
That's
scenario.
Like a meal. That's a meal.
It really is. It really is.
See, I could get on board with that. I'm not a huge nacho guy, but if you're gonna smother it with that kind of stuff, like now you're talking like a meal situation. I could get on. I'm not like a jalapeno guy, but if you're gonna put like steaks and stuff like that on there, all right, let's go. Got a little crunch to it. Okay.
Yep. It's really good. I highly recommend it if you ever get over to a game in Cleveland. So if the Cubs are ever in the World Series in Cleveland.
I went to one game and it was the World Series, and we made sure we ate before we went in because everything was so expensive.
I bet. All right. Well, I think that is going to do it for tonight. We will wrap it up with that. A lot of good stuff in the show today. Heard from some different people than we've heard from before as well. So, all right. Training camp, 3+ weeks away. We are counting down. July 31st.
That's crazy. Here we go.
Hit the like button. And of course, we appreciate you, whatever platform you happen to watch or listen on. We appreciate it. Just keep doing so. We've got a lot more coming up as we get closer to Notre Dame football training camp. Ryan will be in tomorrow. And I'm sure that the unfortunate news of the day will come up on tomorrow's show. So tune in tomorrow. Till then, we will talk to you then on IB Nation Sports Talk.